You see a lot of things on my stage. A lot of anger, a lot of tears, a lot of confusion. But every now and then you get a case that isn't about screaming matches or broken furniture, it's about silence. It's about a person who is physically in the room, but their mind, their heart, their entire soul is 1,000,000 miles away, plugged into a world made of light and code. That's what I saw when I first met Jenna and her family. The story they told me backstage was a familiar one on the surface. The letter from her mother, Brenda, was desperate. Dr. Phil, we're losing our daughter. She lives in her room in front of a computer screen. She's dropped out of college. She's lost her job. She doesn't see friends. She barely sees us. It's like she's been taken over by this game. The labels they used were heavy: addict, lazy, out of control, a complete disappointment. They had painted a picture of a zombie, a shell of the bright, ambitious girl they once knew. And then Jenna walked in. She wasn't a zombie. She was a fortress. Her arms were crossed. Her eyes were guarded. And you could feel this wall around her, a defense system honed to perfection. She was 22, but she had the weary, defiant posture of someone who had been fighting the same battle for a very long time. My first thought wasn't that she was an addict. My first thought was, what is she protecting herself from? Because that's what these behaviors are 99% of the time. They're not the problem. They're the solution to a problem the person doesn't know how to solve any other way. The behavior you see is the symptom, not the disease. The real work is finding the disease. The family saw a girl wasting her life playing a game. What I saw was a girl who had found a place where she felt powerful, where she felt competent, where she felt like she belonged. Her father, Mark, was a stoic man, a guy who clearly loved his daughter, but expressed it through frustration and disappointment. We gave her everything, he told me, his voice tight. A good home, a car, paid for her tuition. For what? So she can pretend to be some kind of elf princess in a fantasy world? Right there, that's the disconnect. He saw it as pretending. For Jenna, I suspected it was the only place she felt she wasn't pretending. In the real world, she was pretending to be okay, pretending to have it all together, pretending that the weight of their expectations wasn't crushing her. In her online world, she was a leader. She was respected. She had a role, a purpose, and a community that validated her. She wasn't failing. She was succeeding, just in a different arena. The problem was that arena had no bearing on reality. Her avatar might have been accumulating virtual gold, but in the real world, Jenna was going bankrupt emotionally, socially, and financially. Before we ever went on stage, I needed to understand the why. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. I started digging into her history, asking about her life before the game became her whole world. And that's when the story started to emerge. Jenna hadn't always been this way. Far from it. She was a straight-A student in high school, a competitive soccer player, the golden child who was going to be the first in their family to get a degree from a top-tier university. The pressure was immense, not just from her parents, but from herself. She had internalized this identity. Jenna, the successful one. Jenna, the one who doesn't fail. And then she did. She got to her first year of college, a big-name school with a cutthroat pre-med program, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't the smartest kid in the class. She was just average. She studied harder than she ever had before and pulled a C in organic chemistry. For her, a C wasn't just a grade, it was a catastrophic failure. It was a crack in the foundation of her entire identity. She didn't know how to be anyone other than the brilliant one. When that started to crumble, she panicked. She didn't tell her parents about her struggles. How could she? Their pride in her was palpable. Admitting she was struggling felt like admitting she was a fraud, so she hid it. She started skipping classes. She was afraid she'd fail. She started spending more time in her dorm room. And that's when a friend introduced her to this online game. It was just a distraction at first, a way to numb the anxiety for an hour or two. But in that world, the rules were clear. You put in the effort, you level up. You complete a quest, you get a reward. It was a world of predictable, reliable success. It was everything her real life was not. The world her father called a fantasy was the only place where her effort and her results were perfectly aligned. It was a meritocracy. And in that meritocracy, she wasn't just average. She thrived. She became a high-ranking player, a guild leader. She was important. People counted on her. They looked up to her. The validation was a powerful drug, far more potent than any grade on a report card. That validation she was getting online was the polar opposite of what was happening at home. As her grades slipped, the communication with her parents became a minefield. Brenda, her mother, would approach it with a kind of worried, passive aggression. Honey, I saw your midterm report. Is everything okay? Are you sleeping enough? The subtext was clear. You're failing, and I'm disappointed. Mark, her father, was more direct. He was a man who understood effort and results. He saw her spending hours at her computer and saw her grades plummeting, and to him, the equation was simple. You just need to get off that damn machine and study. It's a matter of discipline, Jenna. They thought they were helping. They thought they were motivating her. But what Jenna heard was, you are not good enough. You are a disappointment. The one thing you were good at, you're now failing. Every one of those conversations was another push, sending her deeper into the world where she was a celebrated leader, not a failing student. Her retreat wasn't an act of rebellion, it was an act of self-preservation. She was running from the pain of reality to the comfort of a controlled environment. The family was locked in a dysfunctional cycle. Jenna felt shame and anxiety, so she'd escape into the game. Her parents would see her escaping, interpret it as laziness, and react with disappointment and anger. That reaction would validate Jenna's feelings of being a failure, which would increase her shame and anxiety, driving her further into the game. Round and round they went, each person playing their part perfectly. The problem is, they were all trying to solve the wrong problem. Her parents were focused on the behavior, the gaming. They declared war on the computer. They tried setting time limits, which she ignored. They threatened to cancel the internet subscription. Mark even unplugged the router one night, which led to a screaming match that shook the whole house. Jenna wasn't just angry, she was panicked. He didn't just unplug a game. He cut her off from her entire social support system, her community, the only place she felt competent. To her, it was an act of profound cruelty. To him, it was tough love. But tough love without understanding is just toughness. It's just punishment, and it never works. This is what I call blame shifting. It was so much easier for Mark and Brenda to blame an inanimate object, a piece of software, than to look at the crushing weight of the expectations they'd placed on their daughter. It was easier than asking the hard questions. Did we put too much pressure on her? Did we create an environment where she was afraid to fail? Did we ever tell her that we love her for who she is, not what she accomplishes? Blaming the game allowed them to maintain their narrative. We are good parents with a good daughter who has been corrupted by an external force. It absolved them of any responsibility. And for Jenna, blaming them, their pressure, their lack of understanding, was easier than confronting her own crippling fear of mediocrity. She had a PhD in defensiveness. Any attempt to talk about her future was met with a sarcastic, What future? You think I'm a loser anyway. She was using their judgment as a shield to avoid her own. The escalation point, the moment it went from a problem to a full-blown crisis, was when she officially withdrew from college. She didn't tell them for 3 weeks. They found out when the tuition reimbursement check came in the mail. The fallout was nuclear. Mark's anger was white hot. You threw it all away. Your entire future gone for a game. Brenda was just heartbroken, crying, asking, "Why, Jenna? Why would you do this to us?" That phrase, "do this to us," is so telling. In their minds, her failure wasn't about her. It was a personal attack on them. It was a reflection of their parenting. Their shame was wrapped up in her life. After that, the fortress Jenna had built became impenetrable. She got a low-wage, part-time job at a coffee shop to have some pocket money, but lost it after a few months for being late too many times because she'd been up all night coordinating a raid with players in Australia and Germany. She stopped leaving her room for anything other than the bathroom or grabbing food from the kitchen in the middle of the night. The family home became two separate warring countries. The parents lived in the main part of the house, whispering, worried, and resentful. Jenna lived in her bedroom, a sovereign nation with its own language, its own economy, and its own social structure, all glowing from a 27-inch monitor. They were at a complete and total impasse. They came to me because they had nothing left to lose. They had tried yelling, crying, threatening, and pleading. Nothing had worked. They were standing on one side of a canyon, and Jenna was on the other, and the canyon was getting wider every single day. They were hoping I could throw them a rope. What they didn't realize is that they all had to walk down into the canyon and meet in the middle. My job wasn't to give them a rope, it was to show them the path. When Jenna, Brenda, and Mark finally sat down with me on stage, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Brenda was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, and Mark sat rigidly, jaw clenched, staring straight ahead. Jenna, meanwhile, was in her familiar defensive posture, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, daring me to challenge her. It was clear she expected me to be another extension of her parents, another authority figure telling her she was wrong. I started by acknowledging the pain in the room, but I didn't let anyone off the hook. "Jenna," I began, my voice calm but firm. "Your parents are here because they're worried about you. They feel like they're losing you. Can you at least acknowledge that you understand why they might feel that way?" She scoffed. "They're worried I'm not living up to their expectations. That's what this is about. They want me to be their perfect little success story, and I'm not. So now they're just disappointed." "Well, you're partially right," I said, leaning forward. "They are disappointed. But disappointment isn't always about selfishness. Sometimes it's a byproduct of love. They had dreams for you, and when those dreams seem to be slipping away, it hurts them. Can you see how their pain, however misguided, comes from a place of caring?" She shrugged, a gesture that spoke volumes. "Whatever. I don't care anymore what they think." "Oh, I think you do, Jenna," I countered gently. "I think you care a great deal. That's why you built this fortress around yourself. That's why you're so angry. Because it hurts to disappoint the people you love, even if you don't want to admit it. And it certainly hurts when you feel like you've disappointed yourself." That hit a nerve. Her eyes flickered just for a second. "I haven't disappointed myself. I'm actually good at something for once." "And what is that something?" I asked. "Playing a game?" "Jenna, I'm not here to demonize your game. I understand the appeal. I understand the sense of accomplishment, the community, the escape. But let's be real here. Is being good at a game providing you with a sustainable future? Is it allowing you to build a meaningful life in the real world? Because last I checked, you still need to pay rent, buy groceries, and interact with actual people who aren't pixels on a screen. She glared. It's my life. I'm not hurting anyone. Oh, you absolutely are hurting people, Jenna, I said, my voice hardening slightly. You're hurting your parents, who are clearly anguished. You're hurting yourself by isolating yourself and shutting down opportunities. And you're hurting the potential future you, the one who had dreams of being a doctor, who wanted to make a real impact. That's a huge act of self-sabotage. And I guarantee you, somewhere deep down, that hurts more than anything. I turned to Mark and Brenda. And you two? You're not innocent in this either. You've been so focused on the what she's doing, what she's not doing, that you've completely missed the why. You've been trying to put out a fire by yelling at the smoke. The smoke is just a symptom. The fire is the fear of failure, the overwhelming pressure, the sense that she was only loved conditionally based on her achievements. Did you ever create a space where she felt safe enough to say, Mom, Dad, I'm struggling, I can't do this? Brenda started to cry openly. We told her we loved her. We just wanted her to be happy. And what was your definition of happy for her, Brenda? I pressed. Was it your definition of happy, or did you ever ask her what her definition was? Did you ever acknowledge that she might not be destined for med school and that's okay? That she could still be a successful, fulfilled human being without that specific degree? Mark, surprisingly, spoke up, his voice cracking. I just wanted her to have a better life than I did. I worked hard. I wanted her to have opportunities I never had. And that's commendable, Mark, I acknowledged. But in your eagerness to give her opportunities, did you forget to give her permission to be imperfect? Did you forget to tell her that it's okay to fall down as long as you get back up? Because when a child is only praised for success and never comforted for failure, they learn that failure is catastrophic. And when things get hard, they disappear into a world where failure doesn't exist, or at least the consequences are virtual. Jenna was listening now, her arms still crossed, but her gaze was no longer defiant. It was a little softer, a little more vulnerable. I could see the cracks forming in her fortress. I felt like I was drowning, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, and no one saw it. They just saw the perfect grades and the perfect future. And when I couldn't be that anymore, it was like I was nothing. That was the breakthrough. That was the moment she acknowledged the real problem. Not the game, but the crushing weight of expectation and the fear of not being enough. We had hit bedrock, and now the real work could begin. The air in the studio felt different. The tension hadn't vanished, but it had shifted from hostile to heavy, laced with a fragile sense of understanding. For the first time, Jenna hadn't immediately deflected or scoffed. She had admitted to feeling like she was drowning, and that was a monumental step. It was an admission of vulnerability, a crack in the carefully constructed facade. I seized on that moment. Jenna, what you just said, that's real. That's raw. And it's something your parents needed to hear. Brenda, Mark, did you hear that? She didn't say, I hate you. She said, I felt like I was drowning. That's a cry for help, not an act of defiance. Brenda nodded, tears streaming down her face. I hear it, Dr. Phil. Oh, my poor baby. Mark, too, looked visibly shaken. I just didn't know it was that bad. I thought she was just being stubborn. That's because you were both so busy interpreting her behavior through your own lens of fear and disappointment, I explained. You were seeing the what, the hours online, the drop classes, and applying your own meaning to it. She's lazy, she's disrespectful, she's throwing her life away, but the what is rarely the why. The why was pain, fear, and a desperate need for a place to feel competent. I turned back to Jenna, my gaze unwavering. Now, Jenna, understanding why you retreated into this online world is crucial, but it doesn't excuse you from taking responsibility for where you are now. You created a safe haven for yourself, yes, but you also built a prison. You are isolating yourself. You are choosing to exist in a virtual world while your real life crumbles around you. And that's a choice you're making every single day. She bristled slightly. It's not that simple. It's not like I can just choose to be happy and successful overnight. No, it's not that simple to be happy and successful, I agreed. But it is that simple to choose to take the first step, to choose to engage, to choose to try. You're waiting for the perfect conditions to emerge from your room, for your parents to perfectly understand you, for life to suddenly become easy again. But life doesn't work that way. You have to create those conditions. You have to take action, even when it's hard, even when you're scared. I knew she had to confront the reality of her choices, not just the reasons behind them. Let's talk about the consequences, Jenna. You lost your job. You dropped out of college. You don't have a social life outside of your computer. How long do you envision this continuing? Are you going to be 30, 40, still living in your parents' spare bedroom, leading a virtual guild while your real-world resume collects dust? Her shoulders slumped. No, of course not. Then what's the plan, Jenna? I pressed. What's the real-world plan? Because right now, the only plan you have is to escape. And escape is not a strategy for building a life. It's a strategy for avoiding one. I then shifted my focus to the family dynamic, because true change requires everyone to adjust their patterns. Brenda, Mark, your job now is not to police her screen time, not to lecture her about her future. Your job is to rebuild trust. Your job is to create a safe space for her to try and potentially fail without judgment. Can you do that? Can you commit to listening, truly listening, without immediately jumping to conclusions or offering unsolicited advice? They both nodded, Brenda tearfully, Mark with a newfound seriousness in his eyes. We want our daughter back, Mark said, his voice raw with emotion. We're willing to do whatever it takes. Good, I said, because whatever it takes means you have to change your behavior too. It means you have to learn to communicate in a way that doesn't trigger her defenses. It means you have to allow her to define her own success, even if it looks different from what you envisioned. Because if she feels that failure means she loses your love, she'll never take the risks necessary to grow. The confrontation wasn't about shouting. It was about stripping away the layers of defensiveness and blame to reveal the raw, vulnerable human beings underneath. It was about showing them the patterns they were all stuck in and then giving them a clear choice. Continue down this path of growing resentment and isolation, or fundamentally change how they interacted with each other. It wasn't just Jenna who needed a breakthrough. Her parents did too. They all needed to wake up from the collective delusion that their individual behaviors were isolated events, when in fact they were intricately linked, feeding into a vicious cycle of pain and misunderstanding. That day, they finally started to see the connections. They started to see that their family wasn't just a collection of individuals, but a system. And every part of that system needed a fundamental recalibration. The immediate aftermath on stage was always telling. You could literally see the weight of years of unspoken hurt and misunderstanding lift, even if just a little. Jenna wasn't cured, not by a long shot, but she was cracked open. Her parents, for their part, seemed genuinely humbled and ready to try a different approach. But as I always tell people Awareness isn't enough. You've got to follow it up with action. Change is not a one-time event. It's a process, a series of conscious choices made every single day. For Jenna, the first step was incredibly hard. We talked about a digital detox, not a permanent ban, but a structured reduction. She agreed to start by limiting her gaming to specific hours with the understanding that she needed to fill the rest of her time with real-world activities. We started small. A walk outside every day, a meal at the dinner table with her parents once a week, looking into part-time jobs or volunteer opportunities that would get her out of the house and interacting with people face-to-face. The agreement with her parents was equally critical. They had to stop asking about her grades or her future career path for a while. Their job was to initiate positive, non-judgmental interactions, to talk about anything but her gaming or her life choices. How was your walk today? Instead of, did you apply for any jobs? Can you help me with dinner? Instead of, are you going to spend all night on that computer again? It sounds simple, but for families locked in these patterns, it's revolutionary. It shifts the dynamic from interrogation and defense to connection and support. It wasn't smooth sailing. There were slip-ups. Jenna would occasionally fall back into old patterns, staying up late, withdrawing into her room. Her parents would sometimes revert to their old ways, expressing their disappointment in subtle jabs. But the difference this time was that they had a framework for understanding and addressing these relapses. We had given them tools. Instead of Mark unplugging the router in anger, he learned to say, Jenna, I'm feeling worried about you because I haven't seen you out of your room much today. Is everything okay? This was a monumental shift from accusation to concern, and it allowed Jenna to respond without feeling immediately attacked. The biggest challenge for Jenna was confronting her fear of failure. We worked on identifying her core beliefs. I am only valuable if I am exceptional. If I'm not perfect, I'm nothing. We challenged those beliefs head on. I gave her assignments to intentionally do things imperfectly, to embrace the messiness of life, and to see that her worth was inherent, not tied to external achievements. She started exploring different interests, things she had put aside because they weren't academic enough for her old identity. She took an online coding class, something completely new, where the stakes felt lower and the learning process was the reward, not just the outcome. The outcome for Jenna wasn't a sudden, dramatic transformation into a perfectly adjusted, high-achieving young woman. That's not how real life works, and it's certainly not how deep-seated psychological patterns unwind. But there was significant, tangible progress. She eventually found a part-time job in tech support, a role that leveraged her comfort with computers but required real-world interaction and problem-solving. She started making a few friends from work, people who saw her for who she was, not who she should be. She still played her game, but it was no longer her entire life. It had shifted back to being a hobby, a source of fun and community, rather than a full-time escape. Her relationship with her parents also began to heal. They learned to communicate with empathy and respect, allowing her to make her own choices, even if those choices weren't exactly what they would have picked for her. They began to see and appreciate the nuances of her personality, the strengths she had outside of academic excellence. They celebrated her small victories, holding down a job, engaging in family conversations, even just the act of showing up. They started to love her for who she is, not just for who they wanted her to be. It's an ongoing journey. Jenna still has her moments of self-doubt, her tendency to retreat when things get tough. But now she has strategies, she has tools, and critically, she has a family who has learned how to support her, not just pressure her. The canyon between them hadn't been filled in entirely, but they had built a bridge. A sturdy, if sometimes wobbly, bridge built on understanding, empathy, and the hard work of confronting uncomfortable truths. That's the best outcome you can hope for in these situations. Not perfection, but progress. Not a fairy tale ending, but a realistic, hopeful beginning. The journey of change, as I've seen countless times, is rarely a straight line. There are always detours, backward steps, and moments where you question if any progress has been made at all. Jenna's story, like so many others, isn't about a grand cinematic conclusion where everything is perfectly resolved. It's about the messy, ongoing work of living, growing, and recalibrating. One of the key things we focused on in the months following her appearance on the show was helping Jenna develop a new narrative for herself. She had clung so tightly to the identity of the perfect student, and then, when that crumbled, she retreated into the gaming recluse. Neither of these was her full story. I wanted her to understand that life is about collecting experiences, both triumphs and failures, and that each one shapes you, but none define you entirely. Her fear of failure had been so debilitating that it paralyzed her. We worked on reframing failure not as an ending, but as data, information. What did you learn? What will you do differently next time? That kind of mindset shift is foundational to moving forward. Her parents, too, had to wrestle with their own ingrained narratives. Mark, in particular, had always seen success in very traditional linear terms. His own life had been one of relentless hard work and upward mobility, and he couldn't fathom why Jenna wasn't following a similar trajectory. We spent time talking about the changing landscape of careers, the different ways people can find purpose and make a living. It wasn't about him giving up his values, but expanding his definition of what a successful, fulfilling life could look like for his daughter. Brenda's challenge was to step away from her need to fix Jenna. She was a natural worrier, and her worrying often manifested as controlling behavior, even if it came from a place of love. She learned to replace her urges to intervene with questions. What are you thinking about doing, rather than you should do X, Y, or Z? This subtle shift empowered Jenna and ironically made her more likely to seek her mother's input when she genuinely needed it. We also put a lot of emphasis on what I call radical acceptance. This wasn't about condoning Jenna's previous behavior, but about accepting the reality of the situation without judgment or trying to change what had already happened. For Jenna, it meant accepting that she had indeed made choices that led her to a place she didn't want to be, and that it was okay to acknowledge that without self-flagellation. For her parents, it meant accepting that their daughter was on her own path and that their role was to support and love her, even if her path diverged from their initial dream. It's a powerful concept, because only when you truly accept where you are can you begin to figure out where you want to go. A few months after the initial broadcast, I had a follow-up call with Jenna. She was still working in tech support, and she sounded more energized, more engaged. She told me she had started a small online community, not for a game, but for people interested in graphic design, something she dabbled in before college, but abandoned due to perceived lack of practicality. She was teaching herself new software, collaborating with others, and finding a genuine sense of purpose and connection in a creative outlet. It was a beautiful example of taking the skills and desire for community she found in gaming and channeling them into something constructive and real-world applicable. She hadn't gone back to medical school, and she likely never would, but she was building a life that felt authentic to her. She was contributing, learning, and engaging with the world in her own way. She still played her game sometimes, but she managed it, no longer letting it consume her. Her parents, she said, were still learning, but they were trying. They were making an effort to connect with her interest, even if they didn't fully understand them. Mark had even asked her to show him some of her graphic design projects. That right there is progress. That's a father reaching across the divide, making an effort to enter her world, not just demand she enter his. Jenna's story is a testament to the fact that addiction, or what looks like addiction, is often a symptom of deeper underlying pain. It's about finding healthier coping mechanisms, redefining success on your own terms, and learning to communicate in a way that fosters understanding rather than division. It's about the relentless pursuit of authenticity and the courage to build a life that is truly your own, even when it means disappointing others or stepping away from paths that no longer serve you. It's about showing up, taking responsibility, and keeping on fighting for the life you want, one small, intentional step at a time. That's a victory in my book any day of the week.